Hello and welcome back to the John Doe podcast. I am your host, John Doe, and joining me again for the third time is my good friend Luca from Amiable Arguments. Luca, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. I'm glad to be here.
So today we're going to be having a chat about Joey Barton and some interesting things that have been happening. Luca, can you tell us a bit about what's been happening with Joey?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to say before I actually begin to break this down that I'm not a football fan, really. I'm not really that much into sport. There's just it's not that I don't see the value of it or I don't appreciate the camaraderie that it creates in people, but it's just not all it's never really been for me. And I've always just found other hobbies and activities that I'd rather do. Having said that, this story from the football world has absolutely captivated me. And I think it's just so interesting to watch a footballer go off the reservation like this, in a way that I've not really seen in a political sense for quite some time. So yes, I was just wanting to talk about that really, to talk about him. He's a footballer who's retired now, but he's since been a pundit and he also has his own podcast. So he's got his retirement package set up and everything, but really his entire thing has become about pundits and female football punditry in the men's game and a whole sort of massacre of the DIE, diversity, equity, inclusion industry.
So, shall we start by giving people a bit of background on what this is, in case they haven't heard about it? So, Joey Barton recently made some comments as to the quality of punditry or lack thereof.
Mm.
So my understanding of this, Luca, and then you can kind of tell me a bit more about it, is that so Joey was making some comments about the quality of commentary that we've had from female football commentators. And basically, his criticism, if I understand this right, is that he thinks that they have brought in female commentators not because they are themselves experts on the sport and not because they give particularly insightful commentary, but rather simply for the sake of bringing in more women, presumably because there's a benefit in having female representation and they want to hit some sort of parity in terms of representation and how many men or women you've got. But his criticism is basically, in so many words, that look, they're hiring people for the wrong reasons. They've brought in these women, and yeah, okay, fair enough, they're women. But the problem is that they're actually not very good at football commentary. They're not saying anything particularly insightful or interesting. And then this is kind of, ruining the experience of that side of watching football. So obviously that's the sort of thing that in this political climate gets you a lot of pushback, and a lot of people just seem to knee-jerk react as if saying that cannot possibly be valid, and that basically if you say that, it actually means that secretly you hate women and you just want them to get back in the kitchen and make you a sandwich or something like that. So is that roughly what's going on? And can you kind of tell me a bit more about what you've seen of this unfolding?
Well, there's two possible. The fact of the matter is that his message is actually a little bit mixed. He's not kept his story consistent. On one hand, he'll go on Piers Morgan, and Piers will badger him in that sort of uh, rowdy way that he always does, where he doesn't give people the chance to speak. But he on that show, Joey said, "Oh, it's very much about merit, right? My entire argument lies upon the principle of merit. If a woman meets a high enough standard that she's able to give commentary that he obviously judges to be satisfactory, then he's sort of saying, then yeah, fair enough, it's fine that she's there. But then on other occasions, he's gone a bit further, and I suspect that this is his true sort of hope and aim, which is actually just that a return to men's football being commentated on by men. Because Joey's argument is that men and women are biologically different. Men are built more muscular and they're able to run much faster, and the standards of the men's football game are of a just higher athletic quality than that of the women's. And as a woman is incapable by the nature of her sex from reaching that standard of performance, she's ineligible from commentating on the men's game because she doesn't know what it's like to play in a man's game, even if she is, in her own rights, an exceptionally gifted women's football player. So he's given two sort of, you know, goals and intentions behind what he's been saying, but I'm more inclined to believe that his heart is inclined towards the latter.
And just for anyone who's sort of might be thinking, oh, well, how can you say that men are better at football than women, or that, you know, the men's game is that different? And, you know, there was a famous example that really demonstrated this. The US women's soccer team, as they call it, football team over in America, played the Wrexham Red Dragons, who's kind of a retired men's team. And I don't know too much about them specifically, but basically they would be nowhere near the equivalent in the men's game. They wouldn't stand a chance against any professional men's team, I don't think. But they just completely destroyed the women's soccer team, like 12-0. They left them for dead. And I think, you know, generally in terms of in sports, it's understood that the reason we have a men's game and a women's game, you know, different sporting categories, is that just generally speaking, men will outperform women physically just by the nature of the biological differences between the two. So I suppose there's, on the one hand, you can say, well, theoretically, you can still be an observer and you can still talk about, you know, the observations of the game. And if you've been playing it, regardless of your gender, you might say, well, you still understand the principles and you can still watch it, etc. But at the same time, I think it's also fair to say that if you are someone who doesn't have the experience of playing in the men's game as a man, if that's kind of alien to you, I think there is also, I think it's also fair to say that there would be a different perspective you would have. But I think perhaps that there's crossover here, because on the one hand, there is the fact that, you know, they've got women on who would not have the same understanding of what it's like to play football as a man. But on the other hand, it's like the commentary that they've been giving has received a lot of complaints because it really is just not very good.
Right, and obviously I'm not really in the best position to actually judge that because, as I say, I don't watch the football and I don't listen to the commentary. But I have seen the clips going about of the women in question that Joey is mostly targeted as case studies and examples in his argument. And even I can, well, let's put it this way, you know, that their commentary is about as convincing as mine would be. They just sort of speak in general vagueness, you know, in a way that I would, like, oh yeah, it was really really good. You know, there was some sharp corners in there, and you know, obviously there was that offside earlier in the game, but you know, like it'd be as vague as that. It'd be as vague as what I just sort of made up on the spot there. You know, it's
Hmm.
which is not obviously what people are sitting for. They're sitting for proper analysis, which is a skilled understanding, right? You have to really understand it inside and out. And also, you know, but what Joey is appealing to is actually the upholding of a standard. And everyone else is saying, look, we appreciate that, but we'd rather have the ideological commitment. You know, the being forced to choose, right, between standards and DIE, and the amount of people who are saying, well, we choose DIE, you know, as an ideological commitment is quite fascinating.
Yes, it's a very strange thing, and it's one of the things that I've had most difficulty getting my head around when I encounter people who seem to make that choice. One example that jumps to mind is I once had a conversation with a work colleague about the fact that this idea of changing standards to allow women in could actually, in some cases, put people's lives in danger. And the example I gave was that in Australia, they had been trying to encourage more women to join the firefighting service. But the problem that they'd had was that very few, if any, women were able to pass the physical tests. They weren't able to make the physical standard that was required in order to become a firefighter. Because obviously, if you're going to be a firefighter, you will be tasked potentially with climbing into a burning building and carrying someone out over your shoulder and, moving heavy objects. And it's a very, very physical job. You need a lot of strength and fitness to be able to do it well. But of course, the problem was that very few women, hardly any women, could actually make the physical standards necessary. But the incredible thing, and again, it staggers me that anyone could think this was a good idea. They lowered the standards in order to allow women to join. So the point I was trying to make to my colleague was that, look, if you are lowering the physical standards for firefighters, whether they're men or women, but especially if you do it for women, that means necessarily that you are allowing people to join the firefighting service who are not as physically fit and strong as before. And if you're doing that, those standards were there for a reason. And the reason was you need the strongest people possible, the fittest, healthiest people possible doing this, so that when your house is on fire, they can actually climb in and physically pick you or your grandma or your mum or your daughter or whoever it is up and save them from this building. If they don't have the strength to do it, someone could die, and it could be your loved ones. So the idea that you would lower the physical standards just because you think that you want to have more women in the job, to me seems insane, because you're risking people's lives. But the even more insane thing was that my colleague did not seem to be able to get her head around this. And her response was to say that this is, what you're saying is there should be discrimination, that it's discriminating against women.
Yes.
And for some reason, for her, that was...
No, it's not discriminating against women. It's discriminating against anyone who cannot meet the standard, right? I probably could not meet the standard, right? Endurance and fitness, right? That doesn't mean it's discriminating against lanky 6-foot men, right? Up and down the country. It just means that you have to be able to uphold the standard. And, but if that's the point that we've arrived at, where just having standards is discriminatory, then, but obviously it is by its nature, but it's like that for a good reason. It's self-evident. And also, say hypothetically your friend from the workplace heard what you said and thought, oh, right, well, if they've lowered the barrier, then I'll give it a shot. I'll go be an Aussie fireman. Then essentially what they're actually admitting is, well, I don't want the job as it should be. I want a diluted version of that job that is less demanding and more accessible for my convenience. But I thought the whole point of the fire service was that it was indeed that, a service designed to help other people. And the surest way to help other people is by maintaining the standard that was set. And it's not there. Is that what it is now? Having a standard is just being mean. It's actually a bit deeper than that.
Yes, exactly. It's incredible. And I think that is a really good example of this kind of conflict between, do you have a standard that discriminates and necessarily excludes certain people, versus do you maintain that standard and actually make sure that the service being provided is as good as it can be. And I think if you're at the point where it is more important to you not to exclude certain people by a standard than it is to ensure that you have the standard that is there to ensure people's lives are not put in danger. If you're willing to basically sacrifice a certain number of people when the person who comes to rescue them from a burning building physically cannot lift them because you lowered the standard and that's the only reason they're there in the first place. If you're willing to say that it's more important that you don't discriminate against the woman because she isn't physically strong enough than that the person who she can't lift out of the burning building will die, you've lost your mind. And I think that's what it is with these people. I remember in this conversation, my jaw just kind of dropping and my eyebrows kind of moving up, to the back of my head. I mean, I just could not believe this. And I think this is the thing. There seems to be something that's happened to people where, for some reason, they believe that discrimination is such a mortal sin that trumps any other consideration. And to me, that just looks utterly insane.
Well, I mean, even, to go even further with that, though, it's, because obviously with the fire service, that's an example of a physical standard. But what if it's an intellectual standard? What if, say, for example, you go to college and you do your A levels and you come out and it turns out that you don't have the 3 A's that you need to get into, say, I don't know, Durham University, and then so what is that a discriminatory standard that you don't have the grades to go to a particular university, that you don't meet their intellectual standards to be on the course, right? And also, again, it's not just there to be mean, it's not just there to filter out the thickos or something, right? It's there for your best interest, because it's saying, no, we here at Durham University hold ourselves to an incredibly high standards, and we feel that someone has to come with those grades in order to be able to keep up with what we're teaching them. And so it's simply the best way to draw, supposedly, the best people to a job. This is basic, basic stuff. This is not complicated.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of getting to the heart of the matter, that there is an inherent contradiction between non-discrimination and standards. Now, you have to have a standard if you're not just going to let any old person join. If you want to hire someone for a job, if you want to have a student come and study at a university, if you want someone to be a firefighter, well, you want to have someone who's actually able to do it. And the thing is, if you have any standard, that technically means you are discriminating against people. If someone comes along in a wheelchair and says, I want to be a firefighter, and you say, well, look, you can't use your legs, how are you going to save someone from a burning building? And they say, that means you're discriminating against me because of my disability. What do you do? Now, I would have thought that anyone who's considering that their house might potentially burn down, or cares about anyone else whose house might burn down, might be thinking, well, probably it's more important than, that we can actually have someone who can save their life than that we don't discriminate against a person based on their disability. But for some reason, the concept of discriminating against someone because of their disability, for example, that I wonder if there are some people who would still feel like, oh, but I know that that's wrong, so how do we ethically approach this, because we shouldn't discriminate against people. But I guess what this reveals is that actually there are times when you do need to discriminate because people are not all the same. And so I suppose the conflict is between the concept of complete equality, that all people are equal, regardless of all of their various characteristics, versus the reality that all people are very different. You might say that people are diverse, to use that language. People are very different. These are two conflicting propositions, and I think perhaps bringing back to what we started talking about with Joey Barton and his comments, it's certainly not a life or death situation, but it's still something that impacts people, because if the quality of anything in your life is degraded, well, that's a bit of a downer. And it's fair enough not to be happy about it. And essentially, what we're seeing there is a conflict between the idea that we should have, equality and equal representation, at the expense of the standard of, well, but they're not actually any good at their job.
Mm. But even deeper than that, we sort of do just live in a century that has been marked by declining standards, right? I know it's a really trivial point to make, but even when you look at back when Obama and Cameron were sort of prime minister and president around the same time, and there was that sort of I still remember it because I remember like being I was probably only like 14, 15 at the time, but there was a huge fuss made in the papers about the fact that neither of them were wearing ties, right? It was like, oh, we don't need that anymore. That's ties are such an old, backwards, stuffy thing. We don't need those. And so David Cameron's there with his top button undone, and Obama's too, and they're cool and they're chill and they're down with the kids. And it's like it again, but again, it's one of those sorts of things. It's just eroding a standard, just little bit by little bit at a time. That actually, no, if you're going to present in front of the world, was it really too much to ask that you maybe wear a tie to work? Like, I know that sounds like a radical position on ties, but yeah, it's just little things like that as well as the macro, larger things. It's everywhere constantly.
Yeah, and to be honest, I like wearing ties. I actually don't feel like I'm fully dressed if I go out wearing a shirt, and I've not put a tie on. I dress down, to be honest, for work. I know that there are times where if I went into the office and had a tie on, people would think I was overdressed. And it's really remarkable that standards have slipped as far as they have now. I think the COVID lockdowns, got people used to working from home a lot more. And while they were working at home, perhaps people thought, well, I'm not going into the office, so I'm not going to put on a suit, or I'm not going to, dress up as smartly. I remember I myself did continue to, wear a shirt even when I was only doing video calls during that time, because I felt that I do have to, dress for work, put on your costume to get into character, as it were, and that actually maintaining those standards is important. So yeah, slipping standards is a sign of the times. When if you look at how casually people tend to dress now compared to, if you look at footage from 50, 60, 70 years ago, it's so incredibly different now.
Yeah, completely. Right. Okay. So shall we? I'll share my screen. And hopefully that works. Yeah. And
Yes, let's have a look at what did Joey actually say to get himself into so much trouble.
yes. Okay. Is this working? Can you see my
Okay,
screen?
so I think I've
Oh
added
yeah, I
that
can
to the
see it.
stage. So there
Yeah.
we go.
Okay. Okay. So this is. You can see here. This is a response from ITV after the first great kerfuffle. Now, just to make it clear, Joey, sort of in the final months of 2023, had been doing the rounds across a lot of the mainstream media platforms, such as Piers Morgan's show, going on podcasts, and was being sort of kept within the mainstream circles as a form of containment, right? As long as you air his grievances on the public platform, on a mainstream platform, and then those mainstream pundits are able to castigate him in front of an audience and tell him, well, how dare you even consider asking these questions? Then that's all well and good. But ever since the start of this year, Joey really has gone off the reservation. So this is in response to one of the first comments that he made, in which he more or less said that he compared the commentary of certain female football pundits to Rose West. And for those who don't know, she was a really notorious serial killer with her husband Fred. And so he's basically saying that they get up there and they're acting like serial killers and just murdering commentary, which is a very, very spicy simile. But yes, so ITV put out this message saying, for Joey Barton, an ex-professional player with a significant social media presence, he has about 3 million followers, um, to target two of our pundits, Eni Luca and Lucy Ward, with such vindictive remarks based on gender, and to invoke the names of serial killers in doing so, is clearly contemptible and shameful on his part. Football is for everyone, except Joey Barton, apparently. Um,
Or anyone
yeah,
who likes good commentary.
right, yeah, or anyone, yeah, who's shares his grievance. Anyone, again, it's always that when it says football is for everyone, or when anything is, when video games are for everyone, right? I think the point to mention with that as well is that, like, no, football isn't for everyone; it's for anyone, right? And that's not the same thing. Anyone can enjoy football, but they have to come to the stand and meet it on its own terms for what it is. The moment that you start altering the fundamentals of it in order to broaden your appeal, and so that what ideally you create some sort of milk toast lowest common denominator formula of football that is so bland that anyone can be mildly entertained by it, then it's lost the spark of what makes football football, right?
Yeah, and Luca, the way you put that is absolutely brilliant because you said it's not that it's for everyone, it's that it's for anyone. And that is such a good distinction to make. Because, it's like that idea of inclusivity, one of the sort of three tenets of the DIE,
Yes.
inclusion. I think that maybe is part of the confusion of what they're thinking. They're thinking that in order for it to be inclusive, it has to be for everyone. And actually, I think saying that it's for, it can be for anyone is, you're right. There's a really important distinction. It's not the same thing. Yeah, that's a really good way to kind of critique that idea. Yeah,
Like,
I just
but
really like the way you phrased that.
oh well, thank you. I can't claim it to have been an original idea, but I can't quite remember who I did remember it from. But it's also one of those points, right? With I as a non-football fan, wouldn't it just be deeply unreasonable for me to sort of come along and say, well, I kind of want to get into football, but like I don't think I can really get into it because of I think the offside rule's like a bit dumb, right? So maybe if you just got rid of the offside rule, I'd maybe enjoy the game a bit better, right? There'd be, and obviously I'm just using that as an example because it's the first thing that came to my mind, but I'm making the point. Isn't it just deeply unreasonable to walk into something that an entire swathe of the population already have a deep and fierce love for? It really is, their form of tribalism, right? They're either the football fans of the local town or the local city. They might go see a match every month. I know all these people, and they love it. So for other people to come in and just sort of say, well, I would like it, but all of the football commentators are men. Um, that's a deeply selfish thing, actually, to say, to demand of an already established thing that people passionately enjoy and love. It's very self-obsessed.
I agree, and I don't think it's a genuine complaint. I don't think that there are actually people who are, like feminist activists, say, who are watching male football commentary and just thinking, God, I'm really enjoying this breakdown of that match, on Match of the Day or whatever. But gosh, it's such a downer that it's only men talking about it. I just don't think that anyone who was genuinely interested in football and football commentary for its own sake would watch it and have that complaint. I think that anyone who has that complaint and is making it is really someone who is more likely to be someone who, has had their feminist studies indoctrination somewhere and has got this idea that if you don't see an equal number of men and women and everything, the only possible explanation is that women are being unfairly treated and discriminated against, and that's also, that's just a bad thing in and of itself, because it's not because they're not good enough, it's just because of, arbitrary sexist discrimination. And so they see something like that and they think, oh, here's an opportunity that I can come in and be the righteous person saying, oh, look, you're doing something wrong, and I'm the hero to point that out. But it's not actually because they thought, oh, what, this commentary is really not quite as good as it could be. We should get this woman on. She does even better commentary, but like they just won't let her on for no reason. It's not that. It's because they've just got this idea that if you don't have an equal number of people who are men and women in anything, the only possible explanation is sexism, and therefore you have the right to go in and start acting as though the people involved are bad actors and are, discriminating, and that they're sexist, and that they're in the wrong and they need to make accommodations so that we can see more women in whatever it is, so football commentary in this example. But of course, that wasn't the reason in the first place, and now we see that proven because, well, they go out of their way to put women into doing commentary, but again, they're not doing it because they're good at commentary. They're doing it because they're women, and then they get up there, and for anyone who's actually interested in football, what they're saying is complete rubbish.
But also, I think there's also a deeper sort of philosophical point to add here, which is the fact that over the recent years, there's obviously been a lot of talk about women's only spaces, right? And particularly related to the trans people in sports. And I think that this is actually very, very important to tie into what Joey Barton's talking about here. Because although it's not exactly a one for one replication, in the sense that it's not women asking to play in men's football, right? It's not the other sex participating in the sport itself. It's only a matter of punditry. By the very nature of what the turfs and, frankly, normal people are arguing about in the case of the trans thing, that it is inappropriate in certain times, in certain places, for the other sex to have a presence in a particular role, right? That's what they're saying. It's inappropriate for a man to masquerade as a woman and be in a pool full of women swimming far more powerfully and far more quickly than they are, and then also to go into the changing rooms with them, right? This is the entire argument. It is inappropriate for someone of the opposite sex to be there at that time. All Joey Barton is saying is that he, in his view, finds this to be such an occasion in which it is inappropriate to have a female presence. Okay. But whenever, this is exactly the sort of upward battle, though, that there is with this sort of thing. It's just if there is a female only space, it's taken as a given that they need it, and that actually that's a very safe thing and it's very comforting for them. But I remember, because obviously I come from up north, and one of the things that I got to enjoy a few years back was walking around Manchester on my birthday. And obviously, there's a very famous building there called the Salford Lads Club. And, at the turn of the 20th century, in about 1900, and for the preceding decades, these lads' clubs were up and down the country, and it was perfectly normal and understandable that a man, after a hard day's graft at the job, might want to go to a particular building that was exclusively just for him and his male mates after work, where they'd maybe have a smoke or have a pint together. And that there was nothing backwards or ridiculous about that. It was just taken as self evident that it's a good thing that men have a place where they can be and interact. Because the fact of the matter is that having a female presence anywhere, in the same way that having a male presence in a predominantly female space, has a drastic effect upon the dynamics of that space. I was on a film set when I was still doing some acting stuff a few years ago, and it was a film set in which I was doing some acting work for a World War II series, right? And so that meant obviously that I was a soldier, and so all of the extras, all of the actors, we were all men, okay? And that created a very specific sort of camaraderie. And I tell you what, man, the moment that a single we even saw a woman on behind the camera or just sort of working as an assistant director, the entire atmosphere changed. And then all of a sudden it went from camaraderie to one of total, just everyone sort of like vying for her attention and competing to outdo one another like crabs in a bucket. Now obviously I'm not saying that that's what this is with football commentary. I'm not saying but I am saying that it is undeniable that having a female presence in a male occupied space and vice versa drastically changes the dynamics of that space. So I've gone on for
Yeah.
quite a while there, but I thought
No,
you
no.
got what I was saying.
It's interesting, and I completely agree. There is a difference in the dynamic that you have when it's just men to the dynamic when there are women around. And I'm just trying to think, what would be the reaction to people who are kind of on the other side of things with this? And I think they must have a sort of axiomatic belief that it is just that there's something inherently wrong about that there's something inherently wrong with having male only spaces, and that somehow the fact that if there is a qualitative difference in the dynamic, that can only be caused by some sort of arbitrary social construct because we raise men to be men and women to be women, and that's the only reason that they're different. Which I think is complete nonsense, and I think it's very difficult to think of like how you can even approach someone who comes at it with the point of view that the only differences between men and women are due to social conditioning as opposed to being innate biological evolved differences, because we are a sexually dimorphic species and we have different strengths and weaknesses. We have different mating roles, as it were, in that women carry children and men don't, and all the things that this implies. The idea that this is all some sort of arbitrary thing, and really the utopia would be one where in terms of behavior and temperament there would be no difference between men and women. There wouldn't be masculine or feminine differences really, because all men and women would be basically interchangeable. I mean, that to me sounds just abhorrent. The whole reason that men and women are attracted to each other, there's this polarity between the masculine and the feminine, and if you kind of cancel that out, well, you lose that dance, you lose that dynamic. And I think we've got to a point where the obsession around discrimination and this religious zealotry around insisting that all people are equal and the same and there's no meaningful differences has got us to this point where people have to basically deny what their lying eyes are telling them and just ignore the realities that are right in front of them, such as the fact that men and women are different, which is insane because, the differences between men and women are very real. They're not arbitrary. They're not socially constructed. All of that is complete nonsense. And it's actually beneficial for men and women to have spaces where it's just the men or just the women. And I mean, you mentioned, there's the example in sports where there were two things. There's the sporting category itself, where we know that if you allow someone who's a biological male to enter into a female competition, they're going to win. There's the famous case of the swimmer in America who
Yes, Leah
changed.
Thomas. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember what his name was before that, but he's called
No.
himself Leah, and he's done, I don't know what sort of surgical interventions he's had, and then he's been allowed to compete in the women's sporting categories for swimming competitions and is winning. And then there's a female swimmer, Riley Gaines, who's been publicly kind of leading a campaign to push back against this, quite rightly, because it's just obscenely unfair that women have basically lost their own sporting categories, which means they can never win. So, you've got a woman who has for her whole life been training and practicing and sacrificing and dedicating herself to a sport such as swimming. And then you get someone who is not a woman, who is biologically male, who has had testosterone in their veins, who has higher bone density, more upper body strength, and is just physically, there's just no way that a woman can beat this person. Even though in the male category, he was mediocre. And some people would say, well, maybe that's why he decided he wanted to join a category where he could actually win something. And it gets forgotten that, this means that women are denied the chance to win in sporting categories at all. So there's that side of it where there's just the physical differences are it's just manifestly unfair. Then the other side of it is there's the safety for women in women-only spaces such as changing rooms or toilets. And again, it's not that the implication is that every transsexual person who goes into a female toilet is going to sexually assault someone. It's that if you allow people who are biologically male into those spaces, if you don't stop them coming in, that will necessarily mean that the people who are sexual predators can now go into those spaces and you can't stop them. So it's not saying all of the people who go in would be, and they're not. I'm sure they're not. But it means that the ones who are allowed in too, and you can't stop them. So you're kind of seeing this repeated pattern where these people say that they're doing something for the sake of equality, for the sake of helping people, but in practice it ends up doing far more harm than good.
Well, quite so, quite so. I also think that it's important to mention here as well that also what the DIE sort of agenda does here in sort of installing women just into the punditry is it also confiscates from ex-footballers a very natural career path, right? There's sort of like a natural progression, right? Where you start out as a footballer and then obviously you retire in your 30s because even by that point you're too old to be able to compete with the younger players, which is not discriminatory in itself either, is obviously just the state of nature and fact. And a lot of them go into punditry. A lot of them. Gary Lineker did it. Gary Neville did it. Rio Ferdinand did it. That most pundits, from what I understand, are ex-players, and so it's just that thing that so if you've worked and played formidably for your team your entire life, and then you thought, guys, I just still don't want to leave the world of football behind me. I'll try for a position on Sky Sports, where I'll go and talk about football and all the matches and everything, and I'll be able to bring my experience and my wisdom and my knowledge of the game. Oh wait, actually, there's no spaces because they've just installed this random diversity hire instead. And so, it's also really horrid in that sense as well that it removes a natural career progression away from actual footballers.
That's a very good point. the diversity hire thing is, the first thing to say about that as well is that it's not like people don't know that's happening. Everyone knows. Everyone knows what a diversity hire is.
Yes.
And the thing is, again, it's doing more harm than good, because if you have a diversity hiring policy and you say, oh well, now we've got the first woman this or the first black person that, or like we've got these people in, the thing is, even if that individual is actually good at their job, people will still suspect that they only got their job because of their gender or their race, or some other characteristic that meets their diversity quota for whatever they're doing. And so you're even undermining the people who would have got there legitimately on their own merits by doing that. But yeah, exactly. You're also discriminating unfairly against people who otherwise would have got that job. So any time you have a sort of affirmative action, as they call it in America, policy where you are deliberately trying to hire someone because they're not white or they're not a man, for example, people may not think it through that that necessarily means that they are discriminating against people who are white and against men. So they are literally discriminating on the basis of gender and sex if they do that. And that means that someone who actually would otherwise have been the best candidate, the deserving candidate, the person who was right for the job, is now excluded. And literally they are now the victim of racial and or sexual discrimination.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Shall we start scrolling across what the warpath that was Joey Barton's response to this ITV bulletin?
Yeah, go for it. Let's see what we've got on Twitter, or X as it's now called.
Yes. So if there are any children here, please step out because this is going to get colourful. Shut up, you fucking idiots. Keep them off the telly. They're ruining the game for every one of us. It's what happens when you force underqualified, underprepared, tokenistic people onto us. I will be calling them all serial killers from now on. Every clip you fuckers put out. Told you, I don't care anymore. We've all had enough of your woke DIE bullshit. I hope everyone who agrees with me gets right after your social media every time you force this nonsense on us. I tried to play nice, you didn't listen. I'll tell you what, I love the smell of...
That's brilliant.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning,
Yes. Oh, that's glorious.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of heroic.
Joey, tell us what you really think.
Yeah, man. So this for me was just a fantastic start to 2024.
Yes.
This really came down with both feet on the ground and just started running. It's but what I love about this as well is also sort of innate in what he's saying, whether he's really considered this or not. And I think he has, because he's clearly a bit of a a cannon and a head case, but like he's not unintelligent, right? He sees through it, he understands it all as it is. And I just think that also within this is the point that when you go back here, look and read the ITV post, the whole thing is framed as if this is actually not even something that is up for discussion, right? There's a sort of innate Whig history to it that no, progress dictates that eventually women will be allowed into men's sports punditry. And then once they have achieved that goal and we've taken that castle, then it'll just be like that forever and ever for all time, right? We won, case closed, it's done. We won that one, you lost, Whereas what Joey's actually saying here is actually, no, this is wrong and it should be reversed. So even arguing for the reversal of this is heretical.
Scroll down. Let's see some more of what he said.
Okay. So Gary Neville obviously commented on the ITV post as well. Can
Let's
you
see.
see
Yeah.
at the side here? It's at the
Yeah.
side here. It says,
What did Gary
yeah.
say?
He says, "Well done, ITV. It's gone too far, this, and mentioning serial killers is quite simply incredible. My daughters have watched Salford City with me for 10 years and like to comment on football. My mum was kicked out of the football team, boys in the 1960s. Doesn't explain, right? No elaborate. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what his mum was doing playing in the boys' team in the 1960s. I'd
Uh
like
huh.
that fact checking personally. And stopped playing due to misogyny. My sister struggled for funding for her sport for years, and my brother was mocked when he took over the England women's team. I come from a family that has fought these issues for years, and I've witnessed it firsthand. All this does is just discourage, and it's not the way forward. It's bloody hard work for women to succeed in sport and media, as it is without this stuff. Joey did have a response to this, if you'd like to cut straight to that,
Let's do that. Yeah. Gary Neville riding in on a white horse,
right? Um, let
the white knight in
me,
shining armor.
yeah.
To
Gary,
which Jerry retorted,
Joe, Gary, please keep your head down, or you will get emptied as well. I know they pay your wages, and I don't want to have to put you away. Worry about one of the other 3,758 business things you've got going on. I'll decide when it's gone too far, not you.
"Yeah, he's not backing down, is he?"
Right, and that for me is just the actual entertainment value of this. That not just doubling down, quadrupling down, and it's just been so deliciously humorous that
Oh
I
my God,
can't remember the last
Luca,
time I've ever laughed. Yes.
scroll down and read out the next one.
Oh yeah, right. So yeah, for Joey Barton, the
No, no,
ITV
no, no.
business.
Go up. Go.
Yeah, yeah. Is this the same ITV football that tried to cover up Philip Schofield grooming and then bumming an underage boy asking for a friend?
Oh, absolutely roasted.
Yeah, and you can see
Exactly.
here.
Oh
So
my God.
Joey decided to be democracy manifest man, and put up a poll on X saying, "Should ex-women football players commentate, be co-commentary, or be pundits on the men's game?"
Uh
Survey says no.
huh.
One, but
Yeah.
and obviously couldn't give a monkeys is not even worth considering, right? But like the dramatic difference between this is not the Brexit referendum, right? This is not 48-52. This is obvious, and obviously I'm not saying that Twitter polls are ever accurate. They always obviously lean best to whoever invariably's audience, first put them up.
But
You'd
that
never
is over
want.
a quarter of a million people. A
Yeah,
quarter
it's
of
a
a
good.
million people who
Yeah,
voted.
yeah, yeah. It's a good survey, isn't it? That's a good takeaway. And yeah, it's not looking good for Lucy Ward and whoever the other woman were. Um,
No.
no,
Well,
it's
this
not
is the
looking
thing
good.
that's really interesting is that I think certainly in the last 5 years we've really seen a decline in I was going to say respect, trust in the mainstream media. You know, people have come to see that they've been so dishonest and they've been so inconsistent, and they're so obviously bought and paid for by the powers that be, and they're all just working to this agenda that's all pushing all the woke stuff. That people no longer see them as a respectable and trusted institution. I mean, I remember watching the news when I grew up. It was you trusted it. It was there was kind of almost a reverence for for the BBC News. You thought this really is the best take you're going to get on something. You just kind of trusted that what was said was fair and was well thought out and objective. But now, I mean, people just don't see the media that way at all anymore. And I mean, maybe this is another you know, product of falling standards. I mean, the standards for journalism and commentary are plummeting, and so that's why we're at a point now where so many people are just turning around and basically telling them to go do one.
Yeah, and at this point as well, it's also just worth considering, how much of this is even about women's presence in it. And how much of this is just about sticking two fingers up to the establishment, right? And using this as a means to do so. I'm not saying that he's obviously got ulterior motives or anything. I think he means exactly what he says, and he obviously cares deeply about this issue. But he has said previously in other posts as well that he's not afraid of losing anything because he's very wealthy and he's a retired football player. He's not strapped for cash. So, but I'll read another one just for the sake of comedy, if you'd like.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So he says, "Oh yeah, no, sorry, I've read that. Oh, it's because let me go to." Yeah, I'll go past there. Go past there. It says it's. So this was after like the flamethrowering. He said it's Sunday today. I was going to have a day of rest. Some people seem to forget I've been in this industry, football, over 20 years. The players all talk. It's like women in that regard. They tell each other everything. They brag about their conquests. I know all those virtues signaling we've worked really hard for years to get to this position. Females are upset. Your knickers are in a twist. Unfortunately, I know where all your skeletons are buried. That's your fault. You compromise yourself messing with the talent. I don't want to have to exhume some bodies. I also don't blame you using your sexuality to get an advantage. It's a big tool, and everyone should use all their tools wisely in the game of life. We all know those marriages you have violated, what info you got from the pillow talk to get ahead, and is in a desperate situation behind the scenes because of the Me Too movement and the fear it's put to certain organizations, rightly so as well, dirty pervs. We all know some of you have multiple players on the same team on your body counts. I don't judge you solely on that, but come on now. Don't expect me to take you seriously, please. Don't take me for a fool. Lawyer up, sue me, get me cancelled, pressure my employers, my sponsors, do what, and as you please. I've got plenty to fight back with. I've deeper pockets than most. Just remember, people who throw stones shouldn't live in glass houses. I hope you're whiter than white if you come for me. That includes some of the black community currently libeling themselves on my timeline. Don't worry, I see you. I have the screenshots. Carry on your nonsense. I'll delightfully part you from your money. I don't want a war. I never have. That also doesn't mean I will walk away if you start one. I never take a backward step in my. I've never taken a backward step in my life. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. May your gods shine favorably on you.
Wow. So he is obviously alluding to all sorts of shenanigans that the people coming for him would probably prefer remained secret.
Yes.
Yeah, that's he's alluding to quite a lot there. And I
Yes.
mean,
Oh,
the gist of it is, I guess he's saying that a lot of the women, whether it's those commentators, he's not saying specifically,
no.
basically slept their way to those positions.
Mm.
I mean, they obviously didn't get there because of their merit, so
Yes, but all of this entire post, what it seems to be designed towards is just stripping all of his enemies and all of his detractors from any sort of moral supremacy they can bring to the debate. He's saying, look, we're dropping the act right now that you are in any way able to call yourself better people than me just because you disagree with this one political point. Because I know all the, scheming Machiavellian things that you've all done. because you told me and you bragged about it all. So, it's a fantastic way to disarm um, the people who are in opposition to him.
So, do we have any more responses we could look at, perhaps from, either the mainstream media? Are there any sort of news responses that perhaps we could look at?
We do, but I'd actually like to maybe redirect this, if I may, on to something else to do with Joey Barton, because the thing is that this kind of opened the floodgates a little bit. What started as merely a conversation about women commentating in men's football, Joey then managed to just explode to going and talking about a whole host of different barriers. And basically, he just punched a bunch of Overton windows and broke them. So you can see here, I won't go into it in like serious, but you can tell here, right? He starts talking about Normandy veterans and, the way that our country is being mismanaged. You can say here, every time I click it, it always drags me back to, says, yeah, so there's this interview here with this World War II veteran. He says, I bet you this fella stormed the beaches at Normandy thinking about how he was going to help the woke ruin the fucking country. These people hate the country they live in. They want to tear it down. This neo-Marxist bullshit has to stop. They hate themselves. They have no self-worth, nihilistic mindsets, don't want to or can't have children, zero to offer. And when it kicks off again, which it will inevitably do, who do you want alongside you? Some blurt with pronouns and a rainbow flag, some anti-white race hustler. You'll reap what you sow. So you can see, like, all of a sudden, this has totally changed, right? He's just got, and there's way more stuff. There's trans, there's the boat people, there's all sorts of things that he just started going off about.
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
definitely. This is a kind of screw your optics, I'm going in moment,
yeah, yeah.
which
Um,
is, I mean, it's good to see. I mean, it's so good to see when someone gets to the point where they just start calling out all of the bullshit.
mm,
And I think everyone must be sick of it at this point. that's a pretty that's a pretty good meme. Yeah. The other interesting thing, the reason I mentioned the media is that this is a very good example of where you can kind of see how the media works as essentially propaganda, where they definitely want to shape how the public sees this and thinks about it. So, I mean, if I just look at a couple of articles I've got,
sure.
responding to this. So the Daily Mail, this is the Mail Online article. So the phrasing of it, I think, is quite important. Ranting football attention seeker Joey Barton is slapped down by Rishi Sunak, who brands him, quote, completely ridiculous after his sexist comments on female football commentators. So,
Yeah, but unlike Rishi Sunak, at least Joey Barton has opinions.
yes, I mean, Rishi Sunak does seem to be an empty puppet that's an
Yeah.
empty-headed puppet who's just been kind of dropped in to manage the decline of Britain.
Yes.
But I mean, with articles like that, I mean, it's always headlines like that where they're not giving you any sort of objective assessment. They're trying to use language in a very manipulative way in order
It's
to,
just loaded with pejoratives, right? Ranting, and unhinged and all these sorts of unhinged rants. And, they always tell you how you should feel about it before you've even begun reading the article.
and I think
It's so transparent.
Yeah, and I think perhaps the thinking is that a lot of people are too lazy to read the article, and so they will have a headline, and the headline is designed to make you think that, that, you know, 15-word summary, say, or 20-word summary, is the entire issue, and if you just read that, you'll kind of get what the truth is. When actually, probably if you read the article, they won't be able to bend the truth that far in actually what they say about it. So they're literally just doing this to try to manipulate people, because what he's saying is going against the mainstream narrative on these topics. And then I guess the interesting thing, and I've wondered for a long time how it actually works at a newspaper, because individual people working at these newspapers, I think a lot of them will, if they actually look at the facts, would probably not have the same opinion as they would be putting out in the article. It's almost like the organization as a collective entity ends up having to put out material that perhaps no individual would really agree with, because I mean there's so much dishonesty in how the mainstream media talks about most things. But I suppose people in that organization feel like they're somehow trapped, and they would be afraid to kind of stand up and say, actually, I don't think this is true. I think maybe Joey's got a point, even though he's, whatever, using rather colourful language to make it, because they would fear that they themselves might then be tarred and feathered and could lose their jobs.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to be, doesn't it? But it's like that everywhere, right? We have this atmosphere of censorship across every occupation, every institution. Having said that, I have seen I felt a marked difference over the past 6 months. I wonder how much of that is to do with the enhanced freedom of speech on Twitter. That now more and more people who have been suppressed are climbing out of their jail cells, cyber jail cells. Like how many people starting to feel bolder in what they're prepared to say and what stands they're prepared to take. But it is something I've noticed.
Yes, I think that Elon Musk's takeover and subsequent liberation of Twitter, or X, is very significant, and that it's allowed, as you say, many people to come back and start sharing their perspectives more publicly. And a lot of it is, not even people sharing opinions, but just sharing videos. I mean, some of the best propaganda I've seen has been just videos of what's happening, whether it's videos, and I say propaganda, what do I mean by that? Some of the best, some of the most effective posting is really just, videos, say, for example, of, these recent immigrants to, whether it's Ireland or America or parts of Europe, beating the crap out of random people, and sexually assaulting women in some cases. And I think when you can actually see the violence, which thanks to the era of smartphones with cameras, that can just get recorded now. Once you just see video after video after video of these, foreign African people just literally beating the shit out of people, robbing people in the streets. I saw one video of a migrant trying to break into a woman's home and pulling her and her young daughter and bodily throwing them onto the streets and it looked like he was trying to take her away and then rob her, and they got away. But once you see this, once you see the realities that the media are keeping from people and lying about and running cover for, you really start to kind of feel like you have to say more about it. And because what you've seen is real, people are, I suppose, emboldened to start talking more about the fact that, look, what is actually going on with these thousands of unvetted, dangerous fighting age men coming across the channel every day. Might they be a danger to us? Might this be a real problem? And might there be, dangers that you can talk about from this that don't convict you of any sort of, moral crime of being a racist, if you say, well, actually, I don't think this is a good idea to have hundreds of thousands of people completely foreign to us just being imported into the country en masse. So yeah, I think it's had a very positive effect.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. Is there anything else you want to discuss in respects to the Joey Barton thing? Any other comments?
No, I think we've kind of covered it really. I mean, what's happened is he has come out and made these comments, and then there was the, you know, predictable pushback from the mainstream media and the people who are kind of still in that world, and he has just pushed back massively. And I think the poll is good because it shows that actually, as is so often the case, the majority of people are on the side of the dissident. They're on the side of the person like Joey who stands up and says, "Hey, but why is the emperor not wearing any clothes?" And I think it's encouraging to see that. And I hope that what's going to continue to happen is that with more and more incidents like this, trust in the mainstream media and viewership or readership of, mainstream news outlets, whether it's ITV, the BBC, the Guardian, or other newspapers, will dwindle, and people will just, start to look for other sources of news that they find to be more objective and more trustworthy, and that aren't just trying to lie to them and toe a sort of politically correct line, but who are actually going to, say things how they are, because that's what people want. At the end of the day, I think people want the truth.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, well, that's probably a good place to wrap up our conversation, Luca. Again, thanks very much for coming on the podcast. It's always a pleasure to chat with you about these things. And I hope that people have found this conversation interesting and useful. If you have, then please like and subscribe and share with anyone who you think might find this interesting. And we will be back for another podcast in the near future. So until then, thanks very much everyone for joining us. Luca, thank you very much.
No, thank you. I've really enjoyed it.
And we'll see you all next time. Take care.